Before we get started on our journey into the idea of the Grownup God, I thought I would do a couple of short videos to explain one of the concepts that you're going to hear coming up a lot as we progress, and that's the idea of a metaphysical interpretation of Scripture. Now, there are several ways that Christians, that people explore the Bible. Obviously, there's the literal, which many people believe that these stories actually happened. Then there's looking at the Bible in a historical context. You know, what was happening at the time that these tales and stories were written, and how did that play into what was going on in the stories. Now, the way that a lot of people also use the Bible is metaphorically. And that basically means that you can use the names, the places, the characters, and the narrative of the story itself as representing something happening outside of us. For example, the easiest thing to think about is Jesus was betrayed by Judas. And in our lives, honestly, there have been times where we've been betrayed by friends, lovers, whatever. So you can look at the metaphorically and look at how did Jesus act and what relation does that be in the what would Jesus do way of thinking when we're betrayed. Now the fourth way, and the way that's extremely, popular, lack of a better word, is that in New Thought, especially Unity Christianity, is a metaphysical interpretation of Scripture. And that comes from the term meta, meaning beyond, and physical. In other words, beyond the physical appearance or the physical look of the Scripture, of the words. In Unity especially, we look at the narrative of Scripture as being a representation metaphysically of our inner spiritual journey from what we call the Adam to the Christ consciousness. And what that basically means, it's telling the story of us from the point in our lives where we only believed in, or the what we see with our five senses is one of the ways of looking at it. It also represents sort of our reptilian brain, our animal man, our sense consciousness, and also metaphysically it also represents sort of the everyman in the story. And the metaphysical scriptural interpretation basically goes and maps out the Bible as every phrase, every name, every place is representing our spiritual journey from that moment to where we have a spiritual awareness that we're connected to, God of whatever form that you believe in, but even higher than that is an awareness of our higher spiritual self, which we call the Christ consciousness. So, now, metaphysics isn't new. Metaphysical Bible interpretation isn't new. A lot of ancient Jewish Talmudic work was done, metaphysical interpretations of the Old Testament, and the words being used, or let's go back, the definitions being used in metaphysical interpretation, a lot of it comes from the etymology, the origin of the word or the root word in Greek or Aramaic or Latin or whatever language. In Unity, we have two main dictionaries of metaphysical biblical terms. They were both written by our co-founder Charles Fillmore in the late 19th, earliest 20th century, and they are called the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary and the Revealing Word, and they both cover different things. And there's also modern metaphysical dictionary or interpretations of Scripture within Unity and out of it. So basically, like I said, it's telling the story of our internal landscape. So for example, going back to that Judas idea, the Judas story, we have a higher self. We have a spiritual nature, a nature to be loving, to be kind, whatever word you want to take. So we could use metaphysically the idea of that we have a lower thought that in any situation can betray us to our higher self. For example, we're driving to, the zoo. I'm thinking of the zoo in terms of something fun. We're driving to the zoo with our family and we get cut off in traffic. So in that split second, we can, wave the one finger salute, get angry, rage about it, and even at the highest extreme, carry that all the way into the zoo, be pissed off at that guy, totally ignoring the fun with the family because you're just, Urgh. Or we can choose the higher path, just letting it go, releasing that feelings. You probably had someplace better that you needed to get to than me, and letting that moment act. And that's a simple, really quick and dirty metaphysical interpretation of just the idea of Jesus representing our higher consciousness, our higher capacity to love in any given moment, and our lower thoughts that can betray us. Now, the fun things about metaphysical interpretations on a spiritual realm like this is it's not limited to the Bible. I have, at one time, I actually met a metaphysical Muslim scholar who did metaphysical interpretations of the Quran, and I hope during this spiritual journey to kind of dig into that. Because that was something that, honestly, until 5 minutes before I sat down to do this video, I totally forgot. Because it was 20 years ago when I started seminary. But we in Unity New Thought have done metaphysical interpretations of the Star Wars movies, the Harry Potters. I actually am going to share at some point a little fun metaphysical interpretation I did of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, as it represents things, aspects of our consciousness. So really briefly, because I am going to do a follow-up video where I'm actually going to sit down and do an entire little metaphysical lecture of a metaphysical interpretation of something. But as I said, there are aspects of our consciousness. And for example, I have already mentioned in one of the videos I recorded that Peter represents our capacity to faith. Well, all the 12 disciples that traveled with Jesus represent these different aspects of our consciousness. So we'll be exploring those. So this has been totally extemporaneous, totally off the top of my head, but I think you have a rough idea of where I'm going with the idea of a metaphysical interpretation of Scripture. And like I said, in part 2, I will go through a full-on metaphysical interpretation of the Garden of Eden story, actually, based on one of the papers that I had to write in school. As it was in seminary, we had, just like when we were in elementary school learning words, we had to learn and memorize all of the Fillmorian metaphysical interpretations of the entire Bible, as well as doing a personal metaphysical interpretation of things. Like I said with the Judas story cutting us off in traffic, well, that's similar. The idea is that these are happening within our subconscious. So by interpreting them ourselves, we get an idea of how these things relate into our own lives and our own experience. So that's it for now. I hope I gave you a little overview of Metaphysics 101 without making any glaring mistakes. Like I said, this was totally unscripted, off the top of my head, and I'll follow it up with another video shortly.